piece you just heard is called To the Winter Sun. It's by an American composer and horn player, Douglas Hill. This instrument I played is called the Alp horn, and the instruments Olin played are the Alpenglock, or Swiss cowbells, and the Mark tree, or wind chimes. This instrument dates back to mid-16th century Switzerland, and is traditionally made from a hollowed-out crooked pine tree. Although this one here is made from carbon fiber, so it's light and portable, and actually folds up. The original use for the Alp horn was to call cows in for milking at the end of the day, as well as to communicate with other shepherds across wide mountain valleys. But since then, it's just become an iconic sound and symbol of Switzerland. Now, this particular instrument isn't actually directly related to the modern horn or the French horn. We'll get into that name a little bit later. But it is very similar in two ways. The first way is that it's a cylindrically bored instrument. And what this means is that throughout the length of the instrument, it actually gets wider and wider, very gradually. And this is different from instruments like the trumpet or the bugle, which are conically bored, meaning that they're relatively the same width across the entire instrument, but then right at the end near the bell will get suddenly larger. The other similarity it has to the horn is that it's approximately the same length. Now, traditional Alp horns are normally pitched in F sharp just because of how long the trees were, but this one and many modern recreations are pitched in F, so they actually match the exact key and length of the modern horn. The modern horn's origins actually start with an instrument like this shofar, which is made from a ram's horn. Now, this instrument plays a very significant role in the Jewish religion, and it's been used since ancient times, with its first documented use being in Exodus 19 to signal the start of the new year. Today, it's still played on holidays like Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and this is what it sounds like. By the 16th century, people in France and Germany began making these instruments out of metal, and they would use them for hunting. Instruments like this, called hunting horns, or this one in particular, being German, is called a parforce horn, would be worn around hunters' shoulders as they rode around on horseback. And they would use these instruments to communicate with their hunting hounds and other hunters across large distances. Hunters in Britain adopted a similar tradition from France, although their instruments were straight, long, and cylindrical, much more like the modern trumpet and bugle. Here is an example of a German hunting horn call called Zum Essen that would tell people it's time for dinner. This large, it's a lot easier to play it on a smaller instrument, like this post horn here. And you'll notice it also is a lot louder and would project better. Here's that same call. A lot higher. And that will come a little bit later when we get into these crooks. This tradition with the German hunting horn is also very similar to an American tradition that we have with the bugle. Those of you who are familiar with military practices or with scouting may have heard this before. This is mess call. As the hunting horn tradition grew, the hunting horn became a symbolic symbol of hunting and the outdoors culture, much like how the Alp horn became a symbol of Switzerland. Because of this, composers began using the hunting horn in orchestras, both as an incidental instrument during scenes in an opera on stage, and also just in larger symphonic works, just to symbolize the outdoors and evoke that sort of imagery. Parts would be written in the high ranges of the instrument, where more notes would be accessible to the players. In these early Baroque orchestras with the horn, players would play the instrument with the bell up in the air. Now, really quickly, this is not a Baroque horn. This is a classical horn. Baroque horns would be a considerably smaller bell. We'll get into just in a little bit why this bell is a little bit larger. Here's a bit of Johann Sebastian Bach's Brandenburg Concerto No. 1 to demonstrate what the Baroque horn might sound like. Around 1700 in Vienna, instrument makers figured out how to make crooks for the horn that would allow players to have multiple keys available to them without having to carry around several different horns. The horn you just heard was in the key of F, but I could put on a larger crook, like this one, in E flat, to play that same thing just a little bit lower. limitations existed for this instrument. As you may have figured out, there are only so many notes available to the horn. These are the notes of the harmonic series. To work around this limitation, composers would often pair horns in multiple keys at the same time to cover more notes. Composers would also ask horn players to change crooks during or even between movements of a piece, although they'd have to give them plenty of time to do so. Here's an example of a few different crooks. This one is a really small one in A. This is kind of our standard one. This is F. This is the key that the modern horn plays in. And this is E flat. It's another common one, just a little bit bigger than F. By the mid-18th century, German horn players such as Anton Joseph Hampel and Giovanni Punto had created a technique for playing additional notes by using their right hand in the bell to alter the natural notes of the horn. Using this hand horn technique, horn players could now play full scales in a much more comfortable range of the instrument. Now, it didn't take long for composers to start writing music for this new technique, and the natural horn repertoire was born. This next piece will feature Rafn on the piano and showcases what the natural horn is capable of. This is Beethoven's Sonata for horn and piano. Aside from the limitations on number of notes you can play, another limitation with the natural horn is that you don't have spit valves. So you're constantly turning the horn to get the spit out. Horn players, you know how I feel. The natural horn became a staple instrument of orchestras, but it still had one more major development coming. That development was the invention of the valves in the early 19th century. There were three types of valves first used on horns: the piston valve, rotary valve, and the pump-in valve. The piston valve originated in France, and although it's not used on very many horns today, it's still common on many trumpets, euphoniums, and some tubas. Piston valves get their name from their up and down motion. The rotary valve originated in Germany, and it's what you see on most modern horns today because of its rotary motion, rotating, and its very smooth sound. Finally, the pump-in valve is unique to Vienna and is used on Vienna horns, which unfortunately I don't have an example of, but you can Google it, it's really cool. Valves allow players to essentially change the key or the crook of the horn in an instant. And it does this by redirecting the air through different tubes. So when none of these valves are pressed down, the air just runs straight through the instrument. When I put one of these valves down, for example this first one, the air is then redirected through a different set of tubes, this one right here. So putting down just this valve is the same as the added length from this E flat crook. And you can go so on and so forth, adding more and more valves. Although we don't really think of valves this way, we think of it more like a clarinet where you just have different fingerings. Now, the valved horn was first met by quite a bit of opposition from a lot of hand horn players and composers who really liked the kind of brassy sound you get from stopping the horn and thought that the valves are stripping the horn of its natural sound. Although they quickly caught on because of their smooth sound, their versatility, and the ease of playing. The following two pieces I'm going to play for you today would not be possible without the invention of the valved horn. The first of these pieces was written by Dante Yenque, a Peruvian composer and horn player. This piece showcases the lower registers of the horn and captures the essence of tango music through alternating rhythmic accompaniment and a traditional melodic tango figure. This is Tanguito by Dante Yenque. I've got one more piece to share with you today, but before I do that, I just want to thank a few people who made this recital possible. First of all, my professor, Ellen Dinwiddie-Smith, and Professor Caroline for teaching me the horn these 4 years while I've been at the university. You give them a round of applause, please. Next, my family, who helped raise me and support me through my entire musical journey. Thank you. And finally, to all of my fellow students and colleagues who are just there every day to support me through whatever's going on or just laugh about whatever's going on in class. They're what makes this so much fun. Thank you. The final piece I'd like to share with you was written in 2020 by Japanese-Canadian composer Cait Nishimura. Nishimura is best known for her concert band music and as an advocate for music education. Her music has been featured at the Midwest Clinic, Music Fest Canada, and many other international conferences and festivals. This piece, called Golden Hour, was originally written for the horn and piano, but was so popular that it's been adapted for a number of other solo instruments. The golden hour is the last hour of daylight before sunset. Nishimura had two particularly magical experiences during this time of day, which she writes about in her program notes. The first one was while driving through New York City, and the second at Yosemite National Park. Describing the second of these, Nishimura says, "It was as if the sky was on fire. The next few minutes led to a beautiful and calm glow before fading into dusk." To me, this piece is a beautiful piece. We're full of dazzling lights and excitement, which turns into calm and bittersweet as light fades away. I'd like to once again welcome Casey Rafn. This is Golden Hour by Cait Nishimura. Once again, thank you so much for being here. There'll be treats out in the lobby. I'll be up there in just a few minutes.